welcome everyone. You are listening to another new episode of NMPC Plus. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for making us part of your weekly rhythms. My name, as always, is Josh, worship pastor here at the NMPC, little old church plant that could. I am joined by Pastor Sam. Hello, Pastor Sam.
Hello.
I am joined by Pastor Kathy. Hello, Pastor Kathy.
Hello.
And I am joined by Pastor Key. Hello, Pastor Key.
Hello.
And may I start off by saying a very happy and wonderful first day of November to you all.
Yes.
It is officially, in my mind, it is officially the start towards like the end of the year. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm going to say Christmas.
No, I mean, Christmas, obviously you got to wait till after Thanksgiving in order to really kind of like think that we're in the Christmas mood. Although I know some unhinged people that would consider putting up trees now.
Oh my God.
And I pray for you, and I pray that the Lord deliver you from whatever evil spirit that is. But, for funny. Me, like November, December, it's just unavoidable, right? It's like, it's the last 2 months of the year. You're kind of ramping down, and we're kind of like getting to it. But I think that we have a lot of reason to feel excited, to feel jazzed is the word that comes to mind.
Yes.
Jazzed is the word that comes to mind when it comes to the end of this year and the start of next year particularly. The reason I say that is because we came back not too long ago from our staff retreat, our annual staff retreat. And Pastor Key, you and I have traveled before. We've been to the national gathering. We've been to last year's staff retreat. But for our two new, wonderful, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed faces here, Pastor Sam, Pastor Kathy, what's it like? It's the first time you've traveled. What is it like? How is it like to travel? Was it everything that you expected? Was it more? Was it less? Was it about what you would expect?
It was the start of something new.
Wow, how fitting.
I don't. Maybe not the start of something wanted. I don't know, but the start of something. Why do you say that, Pastor Kathy?
Because that's the first song of High School Musical 1.
Oh my God.
Lord have mercy. It has begun.
The context is that we forced the pastoral staff to watch High School Musical, and Pastor Josh had to do some work, so he wasn't able to watch most of it. And then,
what's with the air quotes? I really had to do work.
No, I get it. And then Pastor Key was able to watch some of it, and then fell asleep during, I think, the climax.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, I was actually doing work. I cracked because we had just come back from dinner. I needed to make sure that I got something done, and I knew that it was going to take a while. And so I was sorry to miss out on whatever was going to happen next. But I cracked open my laptop. I started getting to work, and then I had my headphones in because I had to edit the video that we showed on Sunday, and I'm like leaned into the laptop, pretty hunched over because it's just 13-inch screen, and I gotta scrub timelines and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, I look over and I see a young Zac Efron's face on the screen, and I go,
"Yes,
what is happening right now?" And I did one of these things where I opened my headphones for a second. I was like, "Yep, that's High School Musical." They are watching High School Musical. How did you feel about that, Pastor Key?
It's not even him singing.
Only in movie
only
1.
In the first one.
That's your takeaway.
So I was like, so in that sense, I was kind of looking forward to High School Musical 2, because I was like, I wonder what he sounds like.
Oh, don't worry, we'll see it.
But then we were watching Black Widow, and I was like, I prefer this.
That's one of the weakest Marvel movies, too.
It is. And I still prefer it. No.
You take that back right now, Samuel.
It's just okay. ScarJo has done better.
Hey, and we tried. Can I just say, we tried very hard to find some kind of a compromise. I was like, what if we watched Tarzan? What if we watched this movie? What if we watched Little Mermaid or any of these other movies? But, it was... on one side of the aisle, it was like High School Musical 2 or nothing at all. We're all going to bed. And on my side, it's like absolutely not High School Musical. So there was an impasse. There
And then Black Widow.
It's still on Disney Plus.
Yes.
I am curious, though, what people listening to this podcast are thinking that we're not praying.
Ahead.
We're not praying and we're watching TV.
You know, that'd be a fair question to ask. What were we doing? No, I mean, obviously we had downtime, and as much as we did pray and we did plan and we did try to think and to try to hear what God is saying, kind of move in that direction. Obviously, 4 pastors are going to need some kind of downtime, and so that downtime was filled, just absolutely filled with talks of the Disney Channel.
Oh my Lord.
Pastor Key, at what point in the retreat did you feel like you were so far removed from everything that was being talked about?
I think the moment the show came on and I saw them singing
Right.
the lyrics as if they knew them. It's not even as if they knew the lyrics.
Yeah, it's not as if.
And I was filming, and they were both singing, but then, obviously Sam stopped because I was filming.
Sure.
He had a reputation to uphold.
Yes.
So why the shame? Where is the shame coming from?
So 2 things. Number 1, Zac Efron, he sings in the second and third movies, but the first movie, the songs are just way too high.
Yeah, they sing pretty high.
And 2, it's funny that you say shame because my High School Musical playlist is titled No Shame. And it has all the hits.
Oh my gosh.
It does.
Yeah, it's a very good playlist. Folks should follow it on Spotify. Highly recommend.
The only time I heard Zac Efron sing was The Greatest Showman. I thought he was pretty good. He was okay. Not bad. Hugh Jackman was good too.
Yeah.
The eye candy.
I missed that movie as well.
Yeah. I didn't watch the movie actually, but I was forced to listen to the soundtrack by my wife. And then eventually the worm got into my ear. And I was like, oh, these songwriters are actually not bad. They know how to develop a melody.
Why didn't you watch it?
Unlike so many modern people, modern songs today, where it's just a meandering melodic mess. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Yes. Well, learned a lot about each other this past weekend. And, aside from those things, I think because of all things, I was talking about it with my wife the other day. I think it might have been last night. And I was just like, for all of like the ways that we felt disconnected from each other, from like a generation and interest and personality and like introversion, extroversion level, at a certain point, you just kind of go like, oh, but it was fun because we came out with a few of these stories that, like every time you travel, you get these like stories and inside jokes and things like that. And I mean, hopefully it's the first of many times that we get to go away. I mean, the next time that I can think of is the annual fall retreat that we have coming up. Well, just the annual retreat.
That's right.
And, we're not going to be as closely tied together during that time, but, still a time away. But that one's not just for us. It's for the entire church. Right. And so, in so many ways, like November 1 to me, at least, it kind of marks a very auspicious time. Like we're just coming off of a very slow summer and kind of like beginning of fall time. Right. It's usually that in our church. And then now it's really just like we're looking ahead and it's purposeful. We have the annual retreat. We have Thanksgiving. We have Christmas, we have end of the year to think about. And so I was thinking about all these things today, right? And, with all of the kind of holidays that I just mentioned, I thought, and this is kind of related to a couple conversations that we've had, particularly not this past one, but the staff meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, or two staff meetings ago, and sort of related to our last staff meeting. We had a conversation about Halloween and like what to do with Halloween, right? And I thought what we could do is we could try to like talk about that a little bit, because I just thought it was so interesting, because our conversation last time was really we really like got into the weeds of it, right, Pastor Kathy? Like we were talking specifically about like what to do with the children and the kids, and then what do we do when they move on to, you know, youth students, and what do we do for like college age, and kind of like taking it gradually and talking about all those different steps, right? But you know, November 1, that means last night was Halloween, right? And to start off, I mean, like, did everyone celebrate Halloween at least at some point along the way in your childhoods?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I only ask it that way because I've known a few people whose parents were staunchly like,
Wow.
absolutely not. You are not going trick-or-treating. You're not doing any of that. But like, we've all gone trick-or-treating, yes?
Yeah, loved Halloween.
Yeah, and we've all done, have you guys done the school parades where you parade around in a costume?
No, that we didn't do.
No?
Yes.
Oh.
I think that's the last time I dressed up.
In the 80s, they didn't do that.
I only existed in God's mind.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And so, what I'm curious is, guessing we all grew up in the church too. Like we had pretty, long experiences in the church. Okay. What I'm curious to know was, growing up, what were your experiences with Halloween, and how did they intersect with the church? Like, what was Halloween like at church for you guys?
I think we had Hallelujah nights. I think that's what they were called.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if, Halloween's were over the weekend. I think that's what we, replaced it with for the most part, if it is. But honestly, I don't remember if the churches I grew up in were very for or very against. I guess none were very for, actually. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't think a lot of churches were like, yay Halloween.
Yeah. Right.
Like, yay All Hallows Eve.
Yeah.
What about Kathy? For you, when you were growing up in church, how did you celebrate Halloween, and how did it intersect?
Well, at school, I would get dressed up, usually in princess costumes and things like that my mom would make for me. We would make it a whole thing. We would go to the fabric store called the Rag Shop at the time, and then I would pick out fabrics, and the costumes came out so pretty and exactly the way that I wanted. And then at school, we would do the parades. I would go, apparently I went trick-or-treating when I was like a baby, but I don't remember because I was in the stroller. And then I went once when I was in 5th grade. And I realized it wasn't really for me because I don't like candy. But at church, every year there would be a Hallelujah party. I actually just visited my old church's Hallelujah party yesterday because I had to meet a friend there. And yeah, it was a really fun time. They would have all these like stations and booths. When I was younger, they would do like face painting and games and arts and crafts and things like that. And just have it be a night at the church where, they would keep the kids off the streets pretty much. You weren't really, allowed to wear a gory or scary costume. So no one did that. But I don't think anyone really wanted to anyway. So it was pretty wholesome. Yeah. So the church, they never said like, happy Halloween or like this is like such a great holiday or anything. But they did their best to try to reclaim it in ways because it's just such a part of the culture here in America and in other places. And it's unavoidable if you're going to public school. So they just wanted to, give us fun memories of it. And I guess turn it into more of like a cultural tradition instead of like some kind of weird, like religious, not religious, like thing. Yeah. So I have really positive memories growing up in church with that night. Yeah.
Yeah. Pascal, what about for you?
I had a weird youth pastor. He didn't really care. And so we would just dress up, do whatever. And we'd call it All Hallowed Eve or All Saints Eve, I think is what he called it. And we just had a blast. It was good times. I do remember, I guess, so long as we avoided the Ouija boards, I think we were fine.
Sure.
Okay.
But we told ghost stories or demon stories.
Oh, really? That's kind of...
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
And...
like in an organized.
Okay. Just like,
So what's happening here?
it's in separate groups and stuff. But nobody really cared too much in our church. I think we just really went with it. But yeah, that's really much my memory in terms of church. That is, outside of church is a different story.
Oh, sure. We know. We have the police records to show it. No,
actually,
yeah, I think it's about the same for me too. It's kind of like, in elementary school, junior high, you just go along to get along. Everyone, it's sort of everywhere. It's unavoidable, especially living in America. It's kind of part of the fabric of the calendar year and everything that happens in October. And, same thing, like my church always tried to do something in place to kind of, I won't speak to the motivation. I think half of it was like, because other churches were doing it, so we have to have some kind of programming. And then the other half of it was like, if we're going to celebrate anything, we're going to celebrate the Lord. And it turned into, something else entirely, right? Which is fine. But I guess my other question is like, okay, so then when you think about it then, right? When you think about your experiences with Halloween, let's call it just loosely in the world, right? Like in every day. And then how it intersected with your experience of what the church and what your church tried to do with it. And I think a lot of people who grew up in the church that are listening and who are watching, right, like they have a similar kind of a thing to all of us, right? Because a lot of us who grew up in the church grew up in some type of a setting in which they tried to, Kathy, I love the word you use. A lot of them use the word reclaim. A lot of them use the word repurpose. A lot of them use the word respond and all these things, right? But when you think about it, right, and then you kind of juxtapose that against your feelings about Halloween to this day, right? How much of what you feel about Halloween to this day is informed by that time? Is it very influential? Is it sort of influential? Is it somewhere in between? Is it not at all? Like, when you really kind of examine it for yourself, where do you stand? Because for me, I'll say this. For me, just kind of giving you guys time to think, I, of course, am appreciative of the fact that my church tried to do all that stuff, right? But this might just be the bias of somebody who went into ministry for himself, right? It's like, I had to reckon with and think about and what I would do if ever I had to lead a ministry, and as the calendar days roll right past each other, and as we get to these different holidays and we get to places like Thanksgiving and Christmas, obviously we have some kind of thing ready for it, but then what do we do about Halloween? All right, so I've had to think about it, and I think because I thought about it so heavily myself in that way, a lot of how I grew up just sort of got put off to the side to a certain degree. So what I'm saying is that kind of stuff wasn't very influential to me, right? I just had to think about it. I just had to make up my own mind. And so for you guys, like, what is that for you? Was it very influential or not at all? Or where in between is it? Anyone?
Zero.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was too influential.
Okay. Kathy, what about for you?
Well, when I got older, I didn't really think that holidays in general were such a big deal. And I feel like every year you learn more about what's wrong with this holiday, what's wrong with this holiday. And then, that you do start to think about some of those things. So then it comes to a point where it's like, okay, well, if that wasn't even really that person's birthday and there were people who were tortured and killed on that day, this wasn't a discovery day at all. It was a day of like mass murder and violence and all these things. Then I start to think, okay, then I guess what are we supposed to not celebrate any of these holidays? But really, realistically speaking, when I was growing up, did I really know all of the very negative implications or like practices that were done over time with Halloween? Or what the historical origins were of any of these holidays. Not really. So I feel like when I was younger, I didn't even really know about all of the evil or demonic like things about Halloween, because that was just not the part that was taught to me in school. And that's not what they made the holiday about. So, and then when I got older and I worked at a preschool, as soon as October hits, it's like Halloween month. Like that's just the curriculum, because, you're all about the crafts. You're doing all the pumpkin things, the leaves, the talking about costumes, because you're trying to, teach children how to have conversations with you. And then we do the parade, we do all the stuff. So when you're like talking about parade, that was actually just last year for me. This was the first year I didn't dress up. But yeah, like it was always just like a really fun, wholesome time. So when I think about especially something like Thanksgiving, I'm like, ooh, not a great origin.
Sure.
However, what is it to me? It's like a really beautiful time of my family getting together and appreciating each other, making time to be together and eating really yummy food that someone took the time and the love to make. So similarly for me, Halloween has never really been about like the blood and the scream masks and things like that. It's been about my mom and me, like, going together to the craft store, my origin story for loving crafts, and, like bonding together in that way. And then her coming to school and like taking pictures of me during the parade and like, being so proud of me. And then, getting my face painted at church. It was just all good vibes. So yeah, I mean, when I became an adult, it didn't really change so much in that kind of way. I just kind of always saw it as a cultural, just happy holiday where families can kind of get together. At preschool, I would see all the parents come and they would get so excited to see their kids.
Sure.
And their kids would get so excited. Such a great bonding time. And the street that I live on now, there are a lot of trick-or-treaters because it's like one of those kind of like in streets. And I saw like parents and their kids and like they look so excited and like happy and no one was doing anything crazy. Yes, there's craziness that does happen out there, but that isn't really the main association that I personally had with it. So it was never something that I felt like I needed to go and like tear apart in my mind and just like abandon completely. Yeah.
I would say 99.9% of the people, Halloween is just an excuse to have a good time. Yeah, I mean, there's no real kind of association to like I don't even know the history behind Halloween.
It's very confusing.
Yeah. I just looked on some kind of Celtic kind of thing about monsters and fun stuff, but we celebrate the Olympics, and that goes back to the pantheon of the gods in Rome. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Okay.
Right.
I find actually you brought up an interesting point. Christians are all about celebrating Thanksgiving, but if you actually dig into the history of Thanksgiving, you're like, what the freak? And they have a bigger problem with Halloween. So, I don't know. It's just at times it feels very arbitrary. It's this outrage about whatever, but that, at the same time, I do think there are some legitimate points here and there, but I don't know. For me, it's just not a big deal, and I grew up that way. It was not a big deal. So, but yeah,
right. I mean, let's talk about the two biggest things on the Christian calendar: Christmas and Easter. I mean, if we really, 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 really dig, right? Like, there's a 99.9% chance that those aren't the actual days. Like, Christ wasn't actually born on any day like close to December 25th. Neither was he like raised. I think it's closer with something like Easter, but it's still not 100%. And so the idea is not to be 100% historically accurate with how we respond and how we celebrate and how we memorize, or I'm sorry, how we remember, right? And memorialize. What I mean to say is memorialize the day and the feeling and the general celebration, right? I think my question, and it was my question that day in that staff meeting. We talked about it like 2 meetings in a row. But my question in that day, and for this purpose and for this conversation, is this: how readily does the church, do pastors need to have something in response to a Halloween, a Thanksgiving, right? I mean, I'll even throw like, because here's the thing. No one's making a big stink, I think, about why the church doesn't have a really great response to St. Patrick's Day. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, no one's, at least I don't think they are. I don't think anyone's making a huge stink about like why the church doesn't have a response to Labor Day
or Flag Day
or Flag Day or July 4th or Arbor Day, to kind of to push it to the extremes of the conversation. But with something like a Halloween, there is a kind of extra little bit of something, isn't there? Right? Of like, we should try to do something, right? I think generally the resistance is against the celebration of very evil images and like the celebration of gore and horror and death and like darkness, right? It is the general resistance against those things, right? Okay, so my question now for us is, what do we do with that? Like, how readily does the church need to have something in response? And this is hard, I know, because like it spans a whole swath of age groups, right? We have something for kids and for youth and for young adults and for, all stages of like family building and all that stuff. And we speak to parents about how they can minister to their kids. And so I know that it's hard. I know that it's multi-layered, right? But help me understand here, like, what does a pastor, young pastor, seasoned pastor, what does a faithful family trying to be faithful to the Bible, trying to be faithful to the Lord, but also like we have to live in this world, right? And we don't want to be so kind of like building our fences around these things that seem arbitrary to this, that, and the other thing. So like, I don't know, like what are some thoughts that are coming up now as I ask these questions? Is it even helpful that I ask these questions?
No, it is. It is. I just have no thoughts.
I think because it's such a huge commercial holiday, it's very hard to ignore. So I feel like that's part of why it's like such a thing that people feel like they have to respond to. I don't think it's necessarily necessary to make it a top priority in a calendar year. Like when you're planning out, I don't think it's like, all right, and then we have to like build this huge, like, I don't think that's entirely necessary to prioritize. But I mean, it does definitely come up, parents do ask, and they do take their kids to parties, they take them trick-or-treating, they, go to the parades at school, they do all these things. So it's definitely a question that comes up, but the way I see it is that, this separation that you're going to start to fight with yourself if you're growing up in the Christian faith, this idea that you are a Christian and then this is how you're supposed to be because of that. And this is what the world is like. And you're supposed to kind of overcome or reject those things or something. You kind of grow up with this idea sometimes. And if, you're in this mindset that Halloween is something to be ashamed of or that you have to hide, like most kids, not all kids, they're going to dress up for Halloween if they go to a public school, a lot of them, or they're going to want to, they're going to see their friends do it. That part is inevitable. And so if they're told like, well, you're a Christian, you can't do it, no, it's bad, then already from a really young age, you're starting to think, oh, so I'm like really different from my friends, and my friends are not saved, and they start to like have this mental like I'm different kind of thing, and that could go a couple of different ways from there. But also there's this like guilty thing, like, oh, so these desires that I have to celebrate something like this, I can't, this is sinful, and I can't like bring this to church, and yeah, and I feel like that kind of makes me think of the point that you made in the sermon about church is not a place for like perfect holy people. It's like a hospital. It's like a place for people to come to be restored and things. So I feel like if you're going to teach children that, you know, it's bad and all the people who celebrate it are bad and trick-or-treating is bad and all these things, it makes it kind of hard when you're really young to kind of process that and understand that when your teachers who you don't think are bad are, you know, encouraging this celebration at school, your friends who you don't think are bad are celebrating it. And then you kind of get like kind of confused about it. And then you start to feel this guilty shame thing and you start to separate yourself and your Christian self versus your outside in the world self, your school self, your work self. And I feel like that is something that inevitably will kind of become a battle, but to start that so early, yeah, I like my take on it is like that is not something that I would want to, you know, instill in the kids. Like I wouldn't want to instill that kind of shame or that kind of guilty feeling.
No, that's very thoughtful because at the end of the day, the kids, they have no association to any of the history. They're just like, oh, we get to dress up and have a good time. If you think about it, most of the costumes are like bunnies or like Harry Potter or like, you know, Gandalf. Well, I don't know. Gandalf.
Who is dressing up as?
Harry Potter?
No,
as Gandalf.
Yeah, that's why I retracted it.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, so I don't know. I have a fairly liberal attitude with Halloween. You know, if anything, like if we celebrate it, we celebrate in a way where we defang it. Like, you know, that's what Christians have done throughout history. I think for me, what comes to mind is the whole thing where Paul says, look, meat sacrifice to idols. Okay, some people believe there's something happening there, but Paul's like, there's nothing there. Idols are not real, you know, so it doesn't matter whether you eat meat sacrifice to idols or not, right? And in my mind, like, you know, Halloween, yeah, some of the traditions and this and that, but it's gone so far gone in just a commercial cultural phenomenon that almost nobody associates it with that anymore. You know, Christmas trees, for example, you know, we don't associate that with its original roots, you know, and I feel like if you're like, it's not a big deal, I don't believe in these stupid things that they worship, it's just kind of a good time. I don't know, for me, it's just not a...
Well, if I may, though, Pastor Key, because that what you're referencing, and I think you know where I'm going with this, because a couple of verses later, Paul goes, but if you eating that meat causes anyone to stumble, don't eat the meat.
Yeah.
Right? Like...
But how far do you take that? You know what I mean?
Exactly, and that's a question. That's a question that historians and pastors and the church itself has been wrestling with for thousands of years, right?
Yeah. And
so this is a microcosm of that conversation, understandably.
Yeah, so understandably, and my thing is like, I don't know. I've gone back and forth on that with drinking and stuff like that, and at a certain level, like, I don't know, man. Where do you draw that line? You know, for Christmas it's different. There's a different line for Christmas trees, and there's arbitrary line for Halloween. And for me, what I've opted to do is like, you know, try to push the route like, hey, there's really nothing going on here, you know, and this is why I practice what I practice. And I'll try to put forth that explanation as a means of not stumbling, though. But I don't know, man. I've had too many of these boundaries crossed where I feel like they're putting me in this chokehold, and I don't know. I don't know how to draw that line well anymore, unfortunately.
Sure.
You know, and even Paul himself, I think, like maybe in the public he was a little bit more sensitive. But,
right.
But yeah.
Yeah. Sam, I'd love to get your take on this. Number one, just because, you know, you've given a lot of space for others to kind of say what they're thinking. I'd love to give you some of that space for yourself. But number two, as someone who's tasked with being like the primary face-to-face with the youth of our church, I don't know if you've given much thought to it, if you've given like a considerable amount of like, this is why this happens and that happens. And this is like, what I also understand too is like what happens at maybe the adult level of a church has to get funneled and then filtered and then altered in a certain way to fit the minds of the next gen ministries, youth, kids and all that stuff. Not in maybe like a fundamental way, but like, you know, making something like Come Awake possibly meaning something to youth that it might not mean to them in the same way that it does to adults, right? So like for you, Sam, as the primary person that's facing our youth in our church, like what are some of your thoughts on it? Where do you land? You know, as the guy, I'm going to lean on for the youth perspective here.
Sure. I'll pick up on some of what I've heard. The first thing that comes to mind is just the intention of things, right? Whenever you participate or, you know, take an action, the intention is really important, as well as, you know, the goal or the end. So in this scenario, right, like people are celebrating, you know, whatever, this holiday and things like that for, you know, to have fun, for togetherness, maybe family and friendship in that way. So there's nothing, you know, malice in that way, at least from the individual's intent. The second thing that comes to mind is actually a couple of things that came up as we were talking in previous staff meetings, which is just the idea of, you know, having thought and interrogating, you know, your actions or why Christians just do what they do, just in any sort of like activity or even holiday. So what I really appreciated when, you know, we were in staff meetings, it seemed like everyone really just put a lot of thought into something as innocuous, I guess, as Halloween is to, like, you know, the average everyday person. So what I at least took away from some of those conversations, as I think a habit that I've been trying to teach the youth, and what I think or questions I ask myself is, well, why do I do this thing, or why do I participate in, you know, X activity? Is it like helpful? I'm not sure if I asked the is it quote unquote Christian question. I ask, oh, is this helpful? Like, what's my intent in participating in this activity? You know, maybe I'll ask the historical questions a little bit later. But I think if you have that sort of mindset, that intentionality at least, you're doing a lot of the work, the helpful work. And the last thing I'll comment on is the arbitrariness of, you know, drawing lines. I think there are things that, you know, there are things like quote unquote of the world that cannot be redeemed, unfortunately. But there are others that, you know, Christians, like we've said, throughout history, throughout time, we've repurposed, right, for Christian ends, right? So we take the action and we change it to something else, like one prime thing being like Greek philosophy, right? Like person's language, Trinity in three persons language. Part of that, the essence language is straight from Greek philosophy, but, you know, we've retooled that and made it Christian because, you know, in that time, in that area, that's just how everyone was thinking. Everyone was thinking of, you know, divine essence. They landed on person's language, which is what, you know, the church now historically has just used because that's what they decided on, at least the councils. But yeah, that's a whole conversation. But I like to think of it very broadly. I learned pretty early on in my training that all goodness and all truth belongs to God. And it always goes to my like doctrine of creation and doctrine of providence, where, you know, God uses these things and calls them good, you know, inside the church and also out too. But we also need to do a little bit of work when there's something obviously, you know, of the quote unquote of the world. But again, I try to be careful with that language too, because there have been so many, you know, tribalistic tendencies to create these litmus tests, I guess. Yeah,
that's actually very helpful. I like the fact that you brought up some of the language that was adopted in the councils, because those are artifacts of Greek philosophy. And some of Greek philosophy is not very amenable to Christian thought, you know, and it's fascinating because in the book of Acts, when he's arguing with these Hellenistic philosophers, he actually quotes two of the pagan, one poet and another philosopher. And if you actually do a deep dive into what those quotes are referring to, one of them is referring to Zeus. And Paul repurposes it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And says fills it with God instead of Zeus. And that's very interesting. I think it teaches us that a lot of Christianity is lived in the gray and trying to be extremely thoughtful about how we approach things, And so, I might sound a little callous about Halloween and stuff like that, but beneath there, there's a little bit of thought that's involved. And even to your point, actually, one day we should probably do a deep dive on this particular topic about what does it mean to stumble somebody, right? It's fascinating because if you take that verse, what does that mean? Because, at one point, if you take Paul's words just kind of at a superficial level to its logical ends, then by kind of capitulating to not stumbling them, you're reinforcing superstition and legalism and beliefs that will actually lead them astray rather than challenging them. You see what I mean? And so similarly, if you take it to the Pharisaical, when Jesus was interacting with the Pharisees, that argument could be applied there. Oh, you're stumbling the Pharisees by not, capitulating to kind of their view of the law and things like that. And that becomes problematic. And so I always, it's not as clear cut. And so I don't know. But for me, for Halloween, it's just, I guess for me personally, it's just not a big deal, honestly. But I could be wrong. Maybe if I go ChatGPT tonight and say, hey, what's the history of Halloween? And I find out, it's actually the birth of Satan. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's something there,
Right. And I think that's the point. What I've appreciated in this conversation and previous staff meetings is, everyone is putting the work to really think about it deeply. And I think that's just, when you're called Christian by God, a lot of that, where us giving back and us obeying is like, oh, we should put thought into the things we opt into, right? Ask ourselves those questions so that, things that we do, we just don't do without thought, to repeat myself.
Yeah. No, I'll be honest. A lot of the reason why I bring it up today and why I thought our podcast conversation would benefit from something like this is because lately, I think because of our conversation, and Kathy, I'm going to give you a lot of props for this, because of where you kind of brought the conversation when we were having it, and you caused me to be more thoughtful about it, right? Because I was one of those people, let me say it like this. I saw something online. I like the way that this one person said it on IG, something to the effect of, there doesn't always have to be a Christian response to everything that happens in the world, because something like you said, Sam, not everything in this world can be redeemed. Maybe some things can be repurposed. Maybe some things can be reclaimed. But every once in a while, you just come across a thing that just can't be reclaimed by the church, right? Like it just can't be recycled and repurposed. So maybe there doesn't have to be everything. And so for a long time, that's sort of where I was, and that's where I camped, and that's where I parked myself for a long time. And a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that my ministry was kind of evolving in a way in which the people that I faced were getting older and older. I was doing less and less youth ministry. I was doing less and less children's ministry. And so I had less and less of a thing that forced me to reckon with these things, right? And so when we had that conversation, I had to rethink a lot of this stuff. And so honestly, lately, I've just been put in the blender between these like different places because for a long time, it's like, oh, if you do it, then you detract from your witness. And one of the big things that I got from the conversation in our staff meetings, specifically around this topic, was this idea like, there is a point where not doing it, and maybe on this one thing, maybe the thing that we're trying to celebrate, which is the get together aspect of the Halloween, and like when kids get to just have fun and have positive emotion when they think about the church around October 30th and 31st, right? Like just giving them as many opportunities to feel happy and bright and youthful about the church, as opposed to like, oh, this is another reason why the church hates the things that I do, right? Honestly, I'm just getting from it like, there is a point where not doing something, not acknowledging something, not saying anything at all kind of also detracts from the witness, right? And so, I think about the words of Paul in that very passage that you're referring to, Pastor Key, right? It's the thing of like, if it doesn't matter, like if it's food sacrificed to idols, whatever, eat it. But then he also says, but if it causes your brother to stumble, don't eat it. And it's the question of like, what is the thing that causes my brother to stumble? Is it eating it? Is it not eating it? Right. Would not eating it cause the person that does eat it to stumble? Because, and it's like, you just get put in the blender over and over again. And maybe that's the consequence of having a different perspective from the world, right? So it's not that you use that perspective, the heavenly perspective, to sit over the world. But it's like, it's just another reason for you to pull your hair out and be like, what is the right thing here, God?
Yeah.
And so, I don't know.
No, that's great. So I wasn't at that staff meeting when you guys talked about it. Because I was on the toilet. Yeah,
you were sick. I was going to be more generous and say you were sick, but yes.
All right.
But now that I've pieced together what Kathy said is very thoughtful. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's just like when I was working at preschool, if I had been like, no, actually, I'm not going to participate in this costume thing. And no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to. No, this is actually. And, I try to like, teach them or something, like I didn't think that would be really a good reflection of God's love through me. I don't want kids to go past my house and think, oh, that's like that Christian house where they're
Halloween
like,
Scrooge.
Yeah.
That's not what we're trying to do here on Earth.
Yeah. But but there is a thing, I don't know. I feel like the Christian tactic is to like fall back on the abstinence of the thing.
That's true.
And so it's easy to kind of abstain from the thing and then call yourself the person in the right or the party in the right. It's funny because like what's another thing, and I don't even know if it's helpful, but another thing that kind of comes to mind, another example I should say. We're talking about holidays and all these other things. One of the things that comes to mind, and I'm not sure why, I don't know why God is doing this in my brain right now, but it's the thing of like, I'm the worship pastor, right? So I'm the de facto music guy. I'm supposed to like have thoughts as to how the medium of music kind of affects our worship, our witness, our spirituality, kind of like how we do Christianity, blah, blah, blah. And just music itself. Music alone in its very many facets does so many things. Like, honestly, we started this conversation about like High School Musical.
No.
And that's just something to laugh about, but I really don't think anyone's witness is going to be affected by it, right? But let's take another thing, like the celebration of music. A lot of where my mind goes to right now is like music festivals, right? And like on its own, take a music festival, any music festival that is popular all across the world, especially in America or abroad. Like Coachella is one that comes to mind. Burning Man, all these things that use a lot of bad and dark symbols. But I'm just saying, like to the aspect of like the celebration of music, that on the surface is fine. The problem is in practice when the world goes to these things. And I, as the worship pastor, I believe that music itself is a very spiritual thing. Like it's hard to ignore the spirituality that music, just like the very essence of music has and does. Sometimes I'll go so far as to say like the music is the ministry. It's not worship ministry. It is not ministry using music. Music is the ministry, right? The problem is a worship festival. Whoa. Problem is a music festival. A lot of people that go, it's like drugs and alcohol and sex, and it's the celebration of those things as much as it is the celebration of the music itself, right? And so using something like that, I often do that thing. I do that calculation, and then I'll go like, so then ignore the thing altogether, right? Abstain from it altogether because that's the Christian way. Abstinence is more celebrated than thoughtful participation. But again, the thing that I've been put in the blender about lately is the thing of like, Josh, I don't think that association is necessarily true when it comes to the church's response towards something like Halloween, right? I think in this instance, we want to veer towards a thoughtful participation rather than wholesale abstinence across the board, right? I don't know. That's lately where I'm like starting to veer myself.
That sounds like a whole separate podcast.
Yeah,
dissecting music.
Yeah, no, I've had thoughts towards a worship focused centered music something podcast. I've had thoughts about it for a long time. I just don't have the bandwidth or the capacity, but I can also talk about it for 90 minutes at a time. Yeah, I just that's sort of where I lean.
So we should burn our CDs, MP3 players.
Pastor Key, you're old enough to remember a time, especially across the United States, especially in evangelical churches all across America, in which we were told, we were encouraged, we were forced to take our CDs, to take every thing that was not of the Lord and put it in a bonfire in our front yards. Like, you're old enough to remember these things, right? And
that's a memory that was triggered for me,
and that's still happening all across the country to this day. Churches, communities. All these places are like, now it's books and it's always been books, right? But it's all these things that I especially to the place of witness, right? And just to kind of put the NMPC plus spin on this thing, I think especially to the case of witness, right? Like, that's probably the better place to think about whether abstinence or thoughtful participation is the thing, right? Because I think for a long time, the driving factor here was morality, right? And ethics and behavior, right? And there's a part of me that's just like, I don't know, Josh. I've been challenged a lot. I've been challenged a lot, especially these past couple of months, about like what thoughtful Christian witness is and looks like.
Yeah. As much as I would make fun of the whole CD burning thing and stuff like that, I will say this, though, and this is to your point about the power of music and lyric, as well as the power of film, for example. And there's a reason why the movers and shakers invest so much money in trying to shape the culture through film, because it's extraordinarily effective. I just pulled up the lyrics of John Lennon's "Imagine," right? Imagine there's no religion or something like that. What is that? If there's no religion, we'll all be united and stuff like that. I'm like, John Lennon, you have no idea what you're talking about, man. But that sentiment encapsulated in music hits the heart, and it shapes thought, and it shapes culture, and it shapes like attitudes and all those things. And so for me, rather than kind of throwing that out and abstaining from it, what I realize is they're going to listen to it anyway. How do I speak into that as a counter narrative that's even more thoughtful, so that when people engage this material, they're like, oh, you know what? John Lennon is an idiot when it comes to this stuff, and there's actual thoughtful ways of actually thinking about these things. And so yeah, I don't know. This discussion is really great. Awesome.
I love you taking on John Lennon, the most celebrated songwriter of this and every generation past, possibly for 50 generations in the future.
Yes, a musical genius, but when
listen,
it comes to the thinking.
I veer towards where you are right now, but
oh boy,
yeah,
get some hate mail.
If they knew our address. You know what also sucks, because this is also, or like a version or a vein of this conversation is also why I can't watch scary movies anymore. Well, number one, because I'm a scaredy cat. Like it really, really affects me. But number two, the reason why it affects me is because so much of what scary movies are nowadays is just like a dip into the supernatural and a dip into the darkness.
It's true.
And it's like, you know, when it was, I don't know that this was a thing, but like, I don't know, when it was Scream or when it was Friday the 13th and it was just like a good old fashioned like a slasher.
Freddy Krueger.
Maybe not Freddy Krueger because but you know, like it's just like those old fashioned slasher movies. It was just so basic on the face of it. It is like somebody wants to do physical body harm. But like now, we were at, was it here or was it at the staff retreat? You know, like all these smart TVs have ads built into them.
Oh,
and the freaking Exorcist movie came on as an ad. And I was like, what is this? Get out of here, demon. You know, like
legitimately.
It was it was just like so many different ways.
Yeah.
But in that instance, it's like because we know it's real. You know what I mean? Stuff like this.
Sure.
I think that's what makes it so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
But then Pastor Key, it circles back to because we know it's real. Yeah. Then what about like let's go? You know, we're not going to do another hour on Halloween right now, right? But this is why the thoughtfulness of it comes into, because we can't just say like, oh, because we know the effect of it, we resist something like the Exorcist movie and The Conjuring and all these things that dip into the supernatural, and then like have no thought whatsoever when it comes to Halloween.
Yeah.
Right.
No, yeah. Granted. I will say the only Inception dream that I remember in my life was with Freddy Krueger.
Cast that out of you right now, Pastor K.
You don't understand. So I was a kid, and I was having this nightmare, and I woke up, and I'm like, oh, I woke up, and then Freddy Krueger shows up and starts slashing me, and then I woke up from that dream, and that was real life. So it was a dream within a dream. Freddy Krueger.
Nice.
Awesome. I'm tempted to do another 20 minutes to kind of cleanse our palate from that. But mercifully, we shall move on.
Yeah. But, I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, you're right. Thoughtfulness in Halloween, right? When it comes to The Exorcist, maybe we're a little bit quicker. But I feel like there's certain different applications to different scenarios, I just feel like it can't simply be because we're being thoughtful, we need to be thoughtful about this. Well, let me take that back. Because we arrived at this conclusion here, therefore that delegitimizes another conclusion that we've arrived at here.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, I don't know. I don't want to relativize everything. But yeah, just want to throw that out there.
I mean, the other way to say that is like, let's just take like the dressing up portion of Halloween. And, I hear the argument of like just defang it, right? Just reduce it down to its bare bones. What is Halloween to a lot of people? It's just an excuse to dress up in a fun way, you know? And so if it's just that, then sure, that's wonderful. That's nice. Go ahead and dress up, And so I think another way to say, Pastor Key, what you were just saying right there is the idea like, okay, fine. If you're going to dress up, we're not going to assume that you didn't think that you weren't thoughtful about your participation into this thing on October 31st.
Okay.
Right? The call here, I think, is for everyone listening, everyone watching, to please be a little bit more thoughtful. But we're also not going to be the ones with the clipboard and the pen just being like, ooh, this person did this and this person. We're not going to do that, right? But it's, hopefully we're just being a little bit more thoughtful in our participation of a lot of things. Not just Halloween, obviously.
That's right.
Probably when Thanksgiving comes around, we'll have to have another conversation about this. And if anyone asks, so you support the wholesale murder of Native Americans? It's like, no.
No, man.
No. But Thanksgiving is a little bit easier to reclaim because Thanksgiving in and of itself is quite a Christian concept. We can still decry so many bad things that this brings up for a lot of other people, right? So it's that having a thoughtful response, participation, and all these things.
I would say that requires a lot of probably unpacking.
Possibly more.
We should revisit that when Thanksgiving rolls around.
Yeah.
But the point about thoughtfulness in everything, I would say, applies to what we consume on Netflix.
Yeah,
yes,
for sure.
Yeah,
and why are we so thoughtless there? And so point well taken, Josh. I think that's actually very, very good. Good stuff.
All right. Thank you for going on this journey with me, for letting me take us on a 1 hour long journey for me to ultimately say, let's be thoughtful. Thank you.
Isn't that all sermons? It's
it is.
Short point.
It is.
Hour. Okay, we write in the same place.
Yeah. TLDR.
Yeah, you gotta do the
Be more thoughtful.
do the work unpacking.
Anyway, thank you to the three of you for joining me in this conversation. Thank you if you're listening, if you're watching. Thank you for if you've made it this far, then there's some bit of you that probably like either resonates or like is moved by this conversation. So, thank you for listening. We're gonna bring this conversation to a close. We'll be back next week with another new podcast, but in between then, look out for a couple things. There's going to be a special podcast episode because we're leaving for our retreat, and we're going to have a special episode, hopefully, with our retreat speakers. The other thing, too, is if you haven't noticed already, on Mondays, for the next 6 weeks, we have a new podcast called The Search. So that's going to be, there's a name now to it. So that's going to be on your podcast feed, either through Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So look out for those as well. With that, we're going to bring this time to a close. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And this is NMPC Plus signing off for now.